This is a selection from my book, Living Kaddish. The story is called A Second Chance at Kaddish. Then, with only 1 month to go until the end of the year of mourning, I nearly broke what had been, up to then, a perfect record. Through our frequent trips to Israel, we accumulated enough mileage for a free trip to Israel. That summer would include most of my family, but free also meant inconvenient flight connections. We'd have to travel first to Paris and from there catch a flight to Israel. My wife and I and 5 of our children boarded a plane to Paris at 8 p.m. Marv at that time of year was at 9:30 p.m. After boarding the plane, I walked slowly through the aisles, carefully scrutinizing the passengers of the plane, searching for kippot, streimels, fedora hats, even baseball caps. I needed to get a minyan together and nobody looked even remotely Jewish. I couldn't believe that the year was almost over, and of all situations, being on the way to Israel to visit my widowed mother, I wasn't going to be able to get together a minyan to say Kaddish. With a heavy heart, I called a close friend of mine on my cell phone and asked him to say Kaddish at Marv, giving him my father's name, just in case I wouldn't succeed in davening Marv with a minyan that night. The plane took off. It was about 10:30 p.m. when the seatbelt lights turned off. My wife Faggy and I went around the plane asking each man whether they were Jewish. Every time I got an answer in the affirmative, I asked that person to please join me for Marv services at the back of the plane. Nobody, but nobody, was interested. We tried another tactic. We went around again saying that I had to say Kaddish, so would they please join me at the back of the plane for Marv services. After much effort and persuasion, we were finally able to get 9 Jewish men, including from business class and first class, to do me the favor of making up a minyan so that I could say Kaddish. By the time we were able to get them together, dinner was being served, and everyone had to sit down. After dinner, we went back to the 9 men who had previously given their consent to say Kaddish. But now, after having eaten, they were tired, and one by one they started to back out. I left with only 5 men who were willing to help me out with the minyan. Greatly disheartened, I returned to my seat, dejected and depressed. I just returned to my seat when the plane suddenly encountered wild turbulence. We're seasoned air travelers, but we never experienced anything like this before. The dinner trays were flying in every direction. The overhead compartments flew open, bags and suitcases spilling out into the aisles and onto the heads of the passengers. They were screaming and crying everywhere. My wife turned to me and said, "I guess you won't have to worry about saying Kaddish anymore." She told the children to hold hands, and together we recited the Shema Yisrael. We really thought we were going to die. After about 4 or 5 minutes, though it seemed like an eternity, just as suddenly as it started, the turbulence ended, the plane stabilized, and everything returned to normal. The captain made an announcement over the loudspeaker saying that he'd been flying planes for more than 25 years, and this was the worst turbulence he had ever experienced. Immediately, for all this frightening experience, my wife went over to the flight attendant and asked her to announce that evening services, followed by Kaddish, would be recited in the next few minutes at the back of the plane. Within moments, the aisles were filled with men, lots and lots of men, making their way to the back of the plane. By the time I got there were more than 50 men waiting for me to begin the service. Faggy asked the flight attendants for a bunch of napkins for their heads, since not one of them owned a head covering. Together with the kids, my wife distributed the TWA napkins to serve as kippot. Since no one had a sitter, I instructed the group to say Amen every time I raised my hand. I also instructed them to recite the Shema with me, word for word. Marv was conducted with the 100% cooperation of willing Jewish passengers, who heartily answered Amen to my raised hand and recited the Shema, probably for the first time since their bar mitzvah.